Despite what some of the comments suggest, I do not consider this a channel that is primarily about debunking Christianity. I regularly express flaws that I see in the belief system, but the primary goal is to let people who are questioning their faith know that it is okay to ask questions and to be there for people who have left the faith and let them know that they are not alone. But the fact is, and I think it's obvious if you've been watching for a while, I do not believe in God.
I don't believe in a God!
I used to believe in God, but I no longer do. And quite often, people will ask me why I don't believe in God. And I don't always give the same answers because there isn't just one answer. I could say that I don't see the Bible lining up with reality, or that Christians are supposed to have the evidence of the fruit of the Spirit, but I rarely saw that evidence. I could say that I've had way too many unanswered prayers. I could talk about how the problem of evil makes a good God who is also all-powerful impossible in this world we currently live in. But in the end, it really does come down to, I haven't seen any good evidence.
This box contains over 217 bits and pieces of information. Evidence.
And there was a long time where I was really looking for good evidence because I wanted it to be true. So I thought I would talk about evidence today. And I've decided to make this one a two-parter because it got pretty long. So in the first video, I will give reasons why certain people say I reject their evidence. And in the second video, I will talk through some of the evidence that is presented as the best evidence there is and talk about why it doesn't convince me. Hey everybody, thank you so much for liking and subscribing and commenting and all the other awesome stuff you do because you're awesome people. I put the links down below for the social meds, for the Patreon, for the merch, for a secret code that if you crack the secret code, then it's a whole thing. So like I said, I don't believe in God. So either I haven't heard all the evidence that there is for God, or all the arguments for his existence, or I've only heard the bad ones, or I have heard all the evidence and arguments, and I just don't think there's any good arguments or good evidence, or because I don't want to believe that evidence, because I'm stubborn, or I just don't want to believe.
I would love to believe in the existence of God. There's just a single shred of evidence for the existence of God. I mean, anything at all, people.
My challenge for atheists is this. When you're dealing with the topic of God's existence, Jesus' resurrection, the evidence for the Bible, that sort of thing, no sarcasm, no self-righteous posturing allowed.
Besides the entire universe.
Besides the entire universe. Get it? Wow, how did this universe get here? Huh, maybe a God did it? How do we know there's a God? Because there's a universe?
Just no evidence. What do you say to that?
Yeah, I would say you need to do more reading. Others, even
It's not me, Mike. You're saying it like you're talking to me.
You need to do more reading. But you do too. You should do more reading. Yeah. I would say even people like Graham Oppy will admit, who's a popular atheist, there is evidence. Paul Draper as well, who's an agnostic, will say there is evidence. He just is not say there's enough for him.
I'll agree that it's not entirely accurate to say that there's no evidence for God. The arguments that Christian apologists put forward is a type of evidence. It's just not good evidence. It's not conclusive evidence, and I really don't think it's convincing evidence. At least not for me and not for a lot of people. It's like accusing someone of a crime because they happen to be in the same country at the time of the crime. Sure, that's a type of evidence that they were in the same nation, but it's not really good evidence. But instead of going back to the drawing board and looking for more evidence or recrafting their arguments, they say things like it's a heart issue or that we're just being stubborn.
One of the common atheist comments I get, or agnostic comments I get, is there is no evidence for God. And you're like, oh, okay, well, let's take the teleological argument. Or we're going to take this, we're going to argue this down using the design in the universe and the intricacies. How about molecular biology and just show that this is clearly, there's intent going on in what's happening? How about the existence of the human soul? And they go, there is no evidence.
How does somebody say that the human soul is evidence for God? How do you lump in something that hasn't been shown to exist as evidence for something else that has not been shown to exist? It's almost on par with this Michael Scott clip that I've used before.
Is there a God? If not, what are all these churches for? And who is Jesus's dad.
Okay, fulfilled prophecy in the scripture, and that they go, there is no evidence. And so after a while, it's like the reverse of the emperor has no clothes. There are no clothes on anybody ever, no matter, no sarcasm, no self-righteous posturing allowed. And they start to see things that way. And this, I think, is a heart issue. Evidence is a distraction from the heart issues.
Keep in mind, I'm not talking about all atheists here. I'm referring to the ones who've been programmed, like bots, to run around screaming, show me the evidence, show me the evidence, show me the evidence. That's no evidence. That's no evidence. That's no evidence. It's their mantra. And it's incredibly difficult to get them to see how their thoughts and behavior have been conditioned, because now their self-esteem is connected to their membership in their group. Turns out that sitting at your computer all day telling people they're stupid because they're not in your group does give you an easy self-esteem boost. So criticizing their group is an attack on the source of their worth and value, and this makes it extremely difficult to show them how they've been manipulated.
I get annoyed with bad apologetics or unwillingness to accept why someone might not be convinced by an argument, but to call somebody stupid for believing in a God is just ridiculous. I didn't gain a bunch of IQ points the moment I walked away from my faith. In fact, I was really lost at that point in my life and was really close to being convinced about a bunch of other stuff that is equally as false. I was a clean slate looking to understand the world around me. Luckily, I found skepticism and was able to start questioning everything, and was able to have a stronger framework to understand the world around me. But it's because of that framework, not because of my superior brain. I wasn't a stupid person or an illogical person as a Christian. I just had the wrong framework to work by. So I agree, it's not helpful at all to assume that all Christians are stupid, but also, the Bible itself says that only a fool wouldn't believe in God.
So basically, Paul is saying, if you just look around, it's very crystal clear that God has done whatever he has needed to do to give every single human being proof of his own existence. He's made it plain. God has made it so plain that the Bible says in Psalm 14:1, a fool says in his heart, there is no God.
You fool! You foolish fool!
So when Christians feel like atheists are mocking them, just remember that their book mocks atheists.
It's not evidence. That's not evidence either. Nope, not evidence.
I honestly just don't understand what that mouth thing is, besides millennial cringe.
There are other things that they believe. I think they believe in Darwinian evolution. Based on what? Well, the fossil record. That's not evidence.
I know you are, but what am I?
DNA, that's not evidence. I mean, we could say the same thing to every point they're making, but what they do to defend evolution is they put together a case based on pieces of evidence that link together that, in their mind, secure the conclusion. This is what we're doing as well. Abductive, an inference to the best explanation.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but most of the evidence for evolution would be sufficient on its own. The fossil record is strong enough to show evolution. The DNA evidence is strong enough to show evolution. Biogeography, embryology, all of these different fields, yes, they confirm each other, but they're also quite sufficient on their own. It's basically just checking their work. With arguments for God, you have a bunch of different arguments that could be arguments for a possibility that a God exists, but you don't have any showing that a God exists. So when you add up all these insufficient arguments, they don't add up to one sufficient one.
I get it. Facts are those pieces of evidence that we show a jury. But it's a fact that he's guilty? No, it's a fact that these things happened. I can infer now that he's guilty. The facts lead me to an inference.
I think one of the biggest things that J. Warner Wallace misses with his whole I'm a cop who looked at the evidence angle is how different most science is from a police investigation or from the judicial system. With science, the case is never closed. They don't figure something out and go, okay, we figured that out, on to the next thing. Someone is always testing. Somebody is always improving on the previous study. Somebody is always trying to prove it wrong, because the best science happens when you prove something wrong.
Now, I wish it was just the rules of evidence that we all use to get from here to here, but it's not always the case. A lot of what helps people decide whether the facts lead to an inference has nothing to do with evidence at all. It has to do with, unfortunately, the way they were wired, or their memories, their own historical past shapes the way they view things, or what their preferences are, or what their desires are. These are things that people unfortunately allow them to shape the facts into an inference. And so you can end up with two people who look at the same set of facts, and come to two entirely different conclusions. Well, why? Because they've allowed their personal experiences, preferences, and desires to shape their decision. It's this stuff here. It's like we start off in a car, go into the same one of three possible destinations, and we end up in one of those three destinations. Well, why? What? We started off together. Why do we end up in different places? That stuff. That stuff is what drives us. Now, so when I see somebody who looks at a multiverse or looks at evidence in the universe, let's say, and they come to a certain conclusion, like my friends, for example, who look at evidence, and they say, I believe based on the evidence that Darwinism is true, they'll say Darwinism is a fact. No, even if it's true, it's not a fact in that way. The facts are the evidences that lead you to this inference. It might be a true inference, but it turns out when I look at I'm looking at the exact same set of evidences. I'm not making up Christian facts to get to a Christian inference. I'm looking at the same biological facts that they are in DNA, in biology. And I think that it points in the exact opposite direction.
All the evidence points to evolution. And the only way you could come to the conclusion by looking at all the evidence that a God did it, either you have to say that God put all that evidence there to make us think that evolution happened as some kind of test or trick or something, or maybe you're just looking at the complexity and you're not really paying attention to what the evidence says overwhelmingly. So either you're not really looking at the evidence and coming to a different conclusion, or you're painting a picture of a trickster God.
I think that this is the best inference, design is the best inference for the same facts that they say Darwinism is the best inference. Well, why do we end up in two different places here? Sometimes it's this stuff.
One of the main reasons we do science is so that we can get past our own biases and our own preconceived notions. And that is also why other people repeat the same tests, why other people do the same experiments, why other people review what you have done, why other people try to disprove what you have done, so that we avoid those things, so that we can better understand the world around us and remove our preconceived ideas.
Oh, won't anyone pretend to believe me?
I will, Dad.
And that's why you're my favorite.
In order to use God as an explanation for something, like the conclusion of an argument, you first have to establish that such a being exists. Now, this, I don't think, is one I've heard as much.
Why would you roll your eyes at that? If I say a leprechaun stole my sandwich and you say there is no such thing as a leprechaun, my response shouldn't then be, then where did my sandwich go? My response should be showing you that the leprechauns do in fact exist and then establish that they stole my sandwich.
We said no leprechaun this year. You're not chasing leprechaun.
I know. I kind of forgot we're landing on that. I got these great cookie sheets. They're full of glue. But I hear you. It's a frustrating thing. It's like the guy doesn't listen to us, man. We're trying to get through to him.
But I've certainly heard it from some particularly well-known spokespersons online. And it's like the idea that, wait a minute, you can't say that God is the best explanation of X. You haven't shown that there is something like a God to serve as. My initial reaction to this has always been, and it can't be as simple as this, my initial reaction to this has always been, hold on, the argument I'm giving you is meant to establish that there's a God, so then I can point to God to best explain other things.
Because then it's like,
yeah, that's the problem. The argument is usually a circular argument. Again, I'll get more into specific arguments in part 2, but something like morals can't exist without God, morals exist, therefore God exists, is a circular argument. We don't get these syllogisms in science like, hey, if things fall, that means it was caused by gravity. Things fall, therefore gravity exists. It's more, hey, have you noticed that things always fall when you let go? Let's figure out why. And then they figure out gravity, and they figure out the laws of gravity.
Like, there goes science. Right. Like, if you take that method, then you have no science.
Yeah,
like,
Higgs boson. It was posited long before we had any evidence for it, but it was best explanation of the data. Einstein posited all sorts of things about general relativity that he could not prove, but he said this is the best explanation of the data.
Yes, those things were posited based on math and scientific observation, and then they did science to prove it. We can make predictions and hypotheses based on the evidence and conduct more studies and learn more about the world around us and learn more about the universe based on furthering this knowledge that we already have. But with the God question, we are still stuck in the guessing stage, and we've been stuck there for thousands of years. We're stuck in the positing stage. Throughout history, gods have been posited as an explanation for countless things, but we know that Thor isn't making thunder, and we know that the sun isn't a god. Is it really any wonder that we want more confirmation this time around?
The different religious leaders who see evidence like Lazarus being raised from the dead, and what do? They seek to kill Lazarus. They want to get rid of the evidence.
Right.
So it's not always, it's sometimes put, hey, just show me the evidence. But when Jesus did that, they just said, okay, well, not enough evidence, or let's get rid of the evidence. So there's more going on. Oftentimes it's not an evidence issue, it's a heart issue.
The resurrection of Lazarus, the raising of Lazarus is in John 11, but in John 12, talks about they were plotting to kill Jesus because he had worked such a notable miracle. A lot of people were following him now based on the miracle. This is even before the resurrection of Jesus. And then it says, and they also plotted to kill Lazarus because Lazarus is the living, breathing evidence that Jesus raised him from the dead. Now, this is like a no duh, right? Really? Are you kidding me? But this is what I call unbelievable unbelief. And so it tells us, and this is true even now, even with the preponderance of evidence, people have motivations for not accepting what's obvious.
But also, when the story has a built-in part about how people didn't believe the evidence and started a rumor that it didn't happen, to me, that implies that it didn't happen and they are trying to get ahead of all the people who were there at the time who said it didn't happen. This was a way for people at the time to say that they just don't believe because they don't want to believe. It's people using the same excuse 2,000 years ago that they're using today. That doesn't mean just because somebody used it before that it still holds up today.
Why won't anyone believe my crazy story? Oh, God!
Have you ever heard anyone say this? Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
Yeah. It's been a while, though, since I don't deal with atheists that much lately.
Oh, is it because he lost credibility with atheists somehow?
So, I mean, and I think it depends what they mean. Usually when I hear people use that, they're saying something subjective where they'll say like, well, that's not enough to convince me. Because like, what is extraordinary evidence, right? Like, what do you consider that? Can we?
It glows.
Yeah, it glows, right, yeah. So I guess like it depends on what you mean by that. And I think that's obviously not true. And William and Craig and them have responded in terms of like Bayes and stuff like this too, where it's not true. I just don't think it's, why I think that's the case on top of it, yeah.
What the heck is extraordinary? Is there a way to measure if it's extraordinary? To have a certain amount of extraordinary
You're
points?
extraordinary.
Shut up. Anyway, so...
This is awkward.
It's a totally subjective standard. I would say seeing an Egyptian army on chariots go through Canaan right now would be extraordinary, but 3,000 years ago, that would not be extraordinary. But of course, quantum mechanics back then would have been extraordinary for them. It's not extraordinary today. We have multiple experiments showing that. So extraordinary is totally subjective to the person. That's not a good measure because you're basically just saying this. When someone says that, they're saying, well, I already have a worldview I've determined, and anything that goes against it is extraordinary. So if it contradicts my worldview, it therefore is extraordinary, and I need to have extraordinary evidence, whatever that is, to sort of refute it, which is not a good standard to measure anything that could challenge your worldview.
You guys nailed it.
Yeah, I get the reason for the expression extraordinary claims call for extraordinary evidence, but I don't think we need extraordinary evidence. I just think we need sufficient evidence, or at least better evidence than we have now.
You know what goes great with crazy stories?
evidence. You're the evidence.
Now, for some of them, if you show them evidence, you'll find that they don't really mean that there's no evidence for the existence of God. Instead, what they mean is that the evidence that you showed them doesn't personally persuade them. What they really mean is that they don't find the evidence personally convincing. But if this is the case, then it's really about their personal psychology. It's not really about the evidence. And if a person is defining evidence to mean anything that will change their personal psychology, then that would require you to delve into their conscious and their unconscious reasons for rejecting the existence of God.
Yeah, I mean, kind of, but some people are also more gullible than others. Are you also looking at their personal psychology? I had a friend who believed zombies are real in Haiti because she read a book by a Christian missionary who said that zombies are real in Haiti. Now, when she told me this, I did not believe her immediately because it sounded made up with racist undertones, and some Christians will believe anything that a missionary tells them about a different culture. So I looked it up, and I confirmed that no, there are not zombies walking around in Haiti. I was not personally convinced about this, and she was. Whose psychology should we look at? Some people will always be incredulous no matter what you tell them, even if it's something obvious. Some people will believe you if you show them a good reason to believe you. And some people will believe anything. I like being that person in the middle.
What gets at the heart of skepticism, modern skepticism, has two sets of rules. One rule for proving things normally to be true, and another set of rules when they deal with religion or Christianity, and they all of a sudden become super skeptical, right? Like if they took these rules and applied them to the rest of life, they would never know what the weather is. They would never know much of anything. They would just be like, there's no evidence for anything. There's no evidence for anything. That would be the response. It's just hard to be consistent as a real skeptic because you're making an impossible rule for Christ. Or for God.
We have evidence for meteorology being consistent and a good predictor of the weather. We can look at the data and understand how the science works. If someone goes to school to be a meteorologist, they can't just make up their own methods and do things however they want and still be considered a meteorologist because they have to follow the science. But we can't say that about someone who goes to school for theology. And I can say that because I went to school for theology.
They are making a demand for proof that they don't make on hardly anything else that's important in their life. Nothing else, except for this one. Okay, so we have a lack of reason in the approach, all right, from the people who are the smart folk, you know, the critical thinkers, the rational people, and are not willing to follow evidence where it leads. They just dismiss it out of hand. And in using an epistemic method, a method of knowing that they would never use for anything else that their life depended on. And that's the issue.
No, they are following the evidence, and the evidence these people are showing is not good evidence. If I'm going on a boat, my life depends on the boat builders and the engineers and the people operating that boat knowing what they are doing. If I was the first person to ever go on a boat, I would be very diligent about making sure that everyone involved knew what they were doing. But if I get on a ferry that operates multiple times a day and has never sunk, I'm going to just assume that we're going to be okay. I'm going to count that as the data that gives me comfort that I'm probably going to be okay making it across the water. We demand different types of evidence for different reasons. There are good reasons to demand evidence for something that has not been shown to be true in any tangible way. And when the results of accepting this as fact means completely changing your life, yeah, it's worth questioning.
He admitted it. He admitted it. He admitted it.
I could believe in a God could be volitional. I just don't want to. The famous Bon Jovi song, right? It's my life.
A lot of people believe things just because they find them attractive. And one of the attractive things about not believing in God is that there's no moral accountability. You get to do whatever you want and never be judged for it. And I found that to be true for a lot of people. In fact, I found that to be true for me. Half the time, I don't want to believe either because I don't want moral accountability.
Have you been on the internet lately? Where is this place that people aren't being judged? We have the court of public opinion. We can lose friends based on our actions and behaviors. We have the police and the courts. We have the ability for empathy. But he probably means after we die, right? But you can't choose to believe something, and you can't choose to not believe something. And Christianity is the best belief system for doing things your own way. You can do whatever you want, and as long as you ask for forgiveness before you die, you are fine. There is no accountability. That's the whole point of the cross. So you could do the most horrendous stuff ever, ask for forgiveness, and still get into heaven. So why would you ever convince yourself not to believe in God to get away with stuff, which you can't really do? If you believe, you believe. Wouldn't the better option be to believe in God and then do stuff you want to do and ask for forgiveness afterwards? Then do the one thing that will make sure you go to hell, rejecting God?
Is we are in a culture that wants autonomy. Don't tell me what to do. Don't tell me what to think. Don't tell me who I am. I'll tell you who I am.
Listen, there is only one person who can tell you who you are.
Me, Sue Sylvester. And she hasn't quite made up her mind about you.
I want complete autonomy. Make sense? Yet we are, if we're Christians, we're going to surrender our autonomy to the Word of God. And then that's a much bigger ask, I think. So I would find ways to maneuver around the evidence because I wanted to hold on to my autonomy.
Obviously, people aren't rejecting evidence for God because they just want to sin and they just want to make their own God. But something that requires a complete life change does deserve deeper scrutiny. I don't really have to have an opinion on the simulation hypothesis in order to go about my day-to-day routine. I do have opinions, and I lead towards that we probably aren't living in a simulation, but maybe. But mostly I just find it to be an interesting conversation piece.
I thought it was interesting.
But if somebody walked up to me and told me that we definitely live in a simulation, and therefore we have to all dress like Neo from the Matrix, and we have to use I know Kung Fu as a greeting.
I know Kung Fu.
I would take a little more time to make sure that they're telling the truth before I started dressing like Neo from the Matrix.
Wow, JP, that is a great outfit. How much do clothes cost in the Matrix?
There could be emotional reasons. There's many people who have been hurt by a Christian or view Christians as bigoted and intolerant. So although there might be evidence that it's true, their heart just resists it. Friends, there can be a lot of reasons why, even if the evidence is powerful, that people wouldn't believe in God.
The second category is emotional. Got it? Emotional objections. My dad was a Christian and he was a jerk. And I've known a lot of Christians, they are jerks. They're such hypocrites. Okay, well, it doesn't sound like you even know what the evidence is for this or isn't. You don't really care. You just don't like the people you know who are Christians. That's an emotional response. That's not about evidence. So I could spend a lot of time talking about the evidence, but if your objections are emotional, I'm not sure how far that's going to go, right?
But people are also really good at crafting their own belief systems. It's why there are so many religions and denominations. Many people have been hurt by churches and still believe in God. They just go to a different church or believe in God without the church community. There are many Christians who hate the bigotry of some Christians, but they just join a different denomination that isn't bigoted. Sure, the pain caused by churches and the bigotry of people in churches will cause people to start to question their beliefs and to start to question whether or not this is true, and it leads them down a path of looking at the evidence and reevaluating the evidence. But I don't think people reject evidence purely because people were awful to them, or purely because they saw the hypocrisy in the church.
Sorry, my friend, I'm still not convinced. And this is hardly the time or place to discuss it.
But then the biggest, oh look, it's a distraction, isn't that it's a heart issue, or isn't that they don't want to believe so they can sin. It's, well, you can't prove God scientifically because God lives outside of science.
I do think that in a post-Enlightenment world, there were people who sought to find a scientific explanation for everything. And this would obviously be the belief of Scientism. And that is the belief that science can answer everything. But that is not necessarily true, as we know. I mean, obviously, this claim that science answers everything is not a scientific claim. So it's kind of self-refuting on that front.
Again, God or gods used to be used as an explanation for everything in this world. And it was when people did scientific studies and they showed over and over again that there were natural explanations for everything that we once attributed to gods. One by one, things that were explained by God did it or a god did it were shown to be of natural causes. It was only then when people started to say that God works outside of science. If God interacts with us, then those interactions would be testable. If God answers prayers, then prayer studies would show that God answers prayers, but they seem to work out about the same as chance.
Now let's go to the intellectual realm. All right, God, I can't believe on you unless you scientifically prove yourself to me. Do you realize how ridiculous and dishonest that is?
So is it ridiculous and dishonest then for all the apologists that say you can prove God scientifically, or just for the people who aren't convinced by that evidence?
What color is the note C? Middle C doesn't have a color. They're different categories. And if I'm going to say, unless I can see God, hear God audibly, touch him, smell him, taste him, then there's no God. I'm mixing my categories. I am demanding that a God who is spirit reveal himself physically right here, right now. That's dishonest. God is a spiritual being, so therefore to demand that that God scientifically prove himself to me, otherwise I can't believe in it. That's mixing my categories. It's making a big intellectual blunder.
That's not describing the God of the Bible. The God of the Bible shows himself to people. He walks around. He talks to people. He interacts with people. So sure, he's making an argument for a type of God that you can't test, but not the God that he says he's worshiping, that he says he believes in. Jesus allowed Thomas to put his fingers in his handholes. God showed himself to Saul on the road to Damascus. They want their personal relationship God, who loves them and interacts with his people, but they want the arguments for a God who doesn't do that.
You can't have it both ways.
Value your time, then I would suggest that you ask people up front what counts as evidence for the existence of God. Because in order for someone to claim that there's no evidence for something, they first have to say what the evidence would look like if the thing existed.
I can't just tell you what evidence I need in order to believe something. I have to look at the evidence that there is. But a God who wants a relationship with me should know what type of evidence would convince me. And an apologist who actually talks to the real God should be able to get that information to me, right?
So what would count as evidence is another question that one could ask. And the answer, unfortunately, the answer is always astronomical. Well, if God would write my name in the sky while I'm standing there looking there, if he'd come and stand in front of me and say, I exist, I mean, it's a ridiculous standard. And as one wag put it, if God stood in front of you, you wouldn't go to God, you would go to a psychiatrist. So this part of the problem here is the standard that's being used by the skeptic. It's unreasonable.
True. That's why I wouldn't say what evidence would convince me, because I'm not the all-knowing God in this scenario.
If we could prove the existence of God just as surely as we could prove, say, gravity or genetics, well, then there'd be nothing to have faith in. There'd just be facts. There's no choosing whether or not to believe in gravity or genetics. They just are. End of story. Denying their existence is not a free choice. It's just wrong. This is not the sort of thing I have to think that God wants. God doesn't want us to be forced to believe and follow him. God wants us to give the opportunity to freely choose and do so.
So that's pretty convenient. Not if God is real. If God is real, that's a terrible argument. But if God isn't real, and you want people to believe in him, that's a very convenient argument. As convenient as, oh, I have a girlfriend, she just doesn't go here.
With who?
She goes to another school.
And it's also not describing the God of the Bible. The God of the Bible gets very angry when people don't believe in him and shows himself in very violent ways because people don't believe in him. It's clear in the Bible that we are expected to believe in him or we will face his wrath. He's not putting little clues in our path and hoping we find them. He's demanding it.
In a sense, ultimate proof that God exists. Well, you have to say, no, it's not. You see, we are finite beings, and we have finite information. We can't prove an absolute in regard to God. We can't do that because we don't have all information. The Bible tells us God has all information. We don't. That's why there always has to be a faith aspect. Without faith, it is impossible to please him. For he who comes to God must believe he is, and he is a rewarder of those that seek him. In other words, God reveals it to us. And that is ultimately the proof. That's something that I can't prove to you, but God promises. If you search after him as you search after silver and gold, if you search after wisdom, if you search after knowledge, if you search after silver and gold, he'll reveal these things to us because he is the infinite creator God. We are finite created beings living in a created universe, and we know nothing compared to what God knows. And so
the faith argument is just an argument they make when all the evidence fails. And this is someone who owns an entire museum and a replica of Noah's Ark meant to prove the existence of God and the reliability of the Bible. This is a guy who's all about the evidence for God, saying, actually, it's all about faith.
Well, it may not be logical, but I have faith. Faith based on what? What if this is a dream? What if all of this is a dream? What if all this is a dream? And it's not even our dream? It's that dog's dream. Maybe we're just existing in his mind, and all of a sudden he'll wake up to go drink out of the toilet and we'll be gone.
What we have seen today is that there is evidence for God, but people don't want to see it because they want to live their own life and because they're too emotional. Plus, we are making a demand for too much evidence, and there can't be evidence because God isn't scientific. But also, you have to be the one that sets the parameters of what they are trying to convince you of. At the end of the day, these people want you to explain yourself to them, but they are the ones whose religion tells them that they have to convert everyone. You not accepting what they are told they have to convince you of is a failure on their part, not on yours. And if God wants us to believe and he's all-powerful, he would figure out a way to make us believe. Otherwise, it's a communication failure on his part. Never stop looking for the truth. Never stop questioning what you believe. Okay, I'll be back in a couple days with actual examples of the most solid arguments that we are apparently too stubborn to believe. So I'll see you very, very soon. Hey, everybody, thank you so much for making it this far. If you know somebody who may benefit from it, send it their way. As always, I love you all.
Work, Sky Moon.